What would you do if doubt made you test the person you love most? She had everything: beauty, money, and love. Yet insecurity made her set a trap, using a Nigerian pole dancer to test her partner's loyalty. The test worked, just not the way she expected. One decision, one mistake, a lifetime of consequences. If you love intense cross-cultural stories filled with twists, betrayal, and regret, this is Bella's Story Time. Please subscribe, like, and share. Rosalind had learned early that love, especially the kind wrapped in money and influence, was never simple. Sitting in the back seat of Jim's black luxury sedan, she watched Seoul's neon lights slide across the tinted windows like silent witnesses to her thoughts. Jim sat beside her, calm and confident as always, scrolling through his phone, unaware that the woman next to him was already planning a test that would change all their lives. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, beautiful, wealthy, admired. But inside Rosalind, doubt lived like a quiet disease. Jim had everything: old money, new investments, charm that disarmed both men and women. He was generous, polite, and dangerously kind. And that was the problem. Rosalind had seen what men like him attracted attention that never slept. Smiles with hidden agendas, women who pretended not to notice his wealth while calculating it in their heads. She loved him deeply, but love had never silenced her fear. Every laugh he shared with another woman felt like a threat. Every female employee felt like competition. It started subtly. First, she insisted Jim change his personal assistant. "She's too familiar with you," Rosalind had said casually one evening, her tone soft but final. Jim agreed without argument. Then came the housekeeper, then the chef, then the new intern at his firm. One by one, women disappeared from Jim's immediate environment, replaced by men or older staff Rosalind deemed harmless. Jim never questioned her motives. He mistook control for care, but even that wasn't enough. Rosalind needed proof, absolute proof, that Jim's love was not conditional, not weak, not tempted by circumstance. She wanted to see him tested where men usually failed, stripped of comfort and admiration, confronted by vulnerability and desire. And that was when Zara entered the picture. Zara was nothing like the women in Jim's world. She was Nigerian, bold, striking, and visibly hardened by life. She worked as a pole dancer in one of the underground clubs near Itaewon, a place where secrets were bought with drinks and dignity was optional. Zara danced not because she loved it, but because it paid quickly and asked few questions. Life had taught her that survival sometimes came dressed as compromise. Rosalind found her through a fixer. The instructions were simple and cruel. Seduce Jim, make him fall if possible, and report everything. Zara would be paid generously enough to leave the club for months. To Zara, it sounded like easy money. Rich men were predictable. They flirted, they promised, they lied. She had seen enough of them to know how the story usually ended. The first meeting was arranged like coincidence. Jim noticed Zara at a charity networking event. Rosalind insisted he attend alone. Zara wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed seduction. Her beauty was raw, unpolished, and her eyes carried a depth Jim wasn't used to seeing. When she accidentally spilled a drink near him, her apology was quick, embarrassed, sincere. Jim smiled and helped her clean up, unaware that Rosalind was watching from a distance, her heart pounding. Zara expected Jim to flirt. He didn't. She expected him to stare. He didn't. Instead, he asked if she was all right, if she was enjoying the event, if she felt out of place. His questions were gentle, not invasive. It unsettled her. This wasn't the script she knew. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed again, always intentionally orchestrated by Rosalind, always reported back in careful detail by Zara. She tried subtle touches, emotional stories, suggestive comments. Jim responded not with desire, but concern. He asked about her work, her dreams, her fatigue. One evening, when Zara hinted at her job at the club, expecting curiosity or lust, Jim surprised her by saying quietly, "You don't have to stay there forever." That sentence lingered. Instead of offering her money or flirtation, Jim offered advice. He sent her links to training programs, introduced her to a friend who ran a small logistics company, checked in to see if she had eaten. Zara found herself confused, then irritated, then strangely seen. No man had ever looked at her without wanting something in return. Jim wanted nothing except her well-being. Rosalind grew uneasy. This wasn't how the test was supposed to go. Jim wasn't falling into temptation. Worse, he was changing someone. Zara began skipping shifts at the club. She started talking about dignity, about options, about returning to school. Rosalind read the reports with shaking hands, unable to decide whether she was winning or losing. What Rosalind didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Jim himself had begun to feel something unfamiliar. Not desire, not excitement, but connection. Zara's honesty, her struggle, her unfiltered view of life stirred something deep inside him. And in trying to save her, he was unknowingly walking toward a truth that would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. The test had begun, and none of them would walk away unchanged. By the time Rosalind realized the test was slipping beyond her control, it was already too late to pull back without consequences. What began as an experiment had quietly evolved into a living thing, unpredictable, breathing and growing in directions she never planned. Each update from Zara now carried an unfamiliar weight, not just information but emotion, hesitation, pauses between words. Rosalind noticed it immediately. Zara was no longer reporting like a hired actor. She was narrating like someone caught in a story she didn't expect to be part of. Jim, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware of the invisible strings around him. To him, Zara was simply someone life had been unfair to, sharp, intelligent, trapped in circumstances that did not define her worth. He found himself thinking about her at odd hours, wondering if she had eaten, if she was still dancing under harsh lights for strangers who didn't see her humanity. It disturbed him how easily concern turned into priority. Their meetings grew longer, more intentional. Jim invited Zara for coffee during lunch breaks, always in public, always respectful. He never touched her beyond polite gestures. Yet those conversations carried intimacy far deeper than physical contact. Zara spoke about Nigeria, about dreams interrupted by poverty, about nights when music drowned out her tears at the club. Jim listened not like a savior, but like a man trying to understand a world he had never been forced to imagine. For Zara, the confusion was unbearable. She had been hired to destroy something, not feel something. Every instinct told her to push harder, to flirt more aggressively, to end the assignment quickly and collect her money. But whenever she tried, Jim gently redirected the conversation. When she leaned closer, he leaned back. When she hinted, he responded with boundaries. And somehow, those boundaries made her feel safer than desire ever had. Rosalind watched from a distance, her chest tightening with every passing day. She began showing up unexpectedly, dropping by Jim's office, calling during his meetings, casually mentioning Zara's name to measure his reaction. Jim spoke of Zara kindly, but neutrally, unaware that each word landed like a blade in Rosalind's mind. He was not defensive. He was not secretive. That frightened her more than guilt ever would. One evening, unable to contain herself, Rosalind confronted Zara privately. They met in a quiet restaurant far from Jim's usual routes. Rosalind's tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed impatience. She reminded Zara of the agreement, of the payment, of the purpose. Zara listened silently, her fingers trembling around her glass. When Rosalind asked if Jim had crossed any line, Zara shook her head. "No," she said truthfully. "He hasn't." "What about you?" Rosalind pressed. Zara hesitated. That pause told Rosalind everything she feared. She warned Zara sharply, reminding her of her place, of boundaries, of consequences. Zara nodded, apologizing, promising professionalism. But inside, something broke. For the first time in her life, Zara realized she did not want the money more than she wanted respect from herself. Meanwhile, Jim made a decision that would quietly alter the balance of everything. He arranged an interview for Zara with his friend Min Jae, the logistics company owner. It wasn't charity. Zara would still have to prove herself. When Jim told her, Zara stared at him in disbelief. No man had ever invested in her future without expecting her body in return. Her voice cracked when she said thank you. Jim smiled and replied, "Just don't waste the chance." That night, Zara did not go to the club. Rosalind found out the next morning. The reports stopped sounding rehearsed. Zara spoke less about seduction and more about fear of failing, fear of hoping. Rosalind oscillated between anger and panic. She had wanted confirmation of Jim's loyalty, not proof of his goodness. Good men were dangerous. They didn't fail loudly. They changed people quietly. Jim began to feel it too, the tension, the unspoken heaviness whenever Rosalind mentioned trust or loyalty. He sensed something was wrong but could not name it. He still loved Rosalind, or at least the version of her he believed in. Yet his heart now held a growing space filled with concern for another woman, and that realization terrified him. Zara, caught between truth and obligation, stood at a crossroads. She could finish the job, betray Jim, and walk away richer. Or she could walk away empty-handed but intact. What she didn't yet know was that the choice had already set events in motion that none of them could undo. Because Rosalind, pushed by fear and jealousy, had decided the test needed escalation. And Jim was about to learn that love, once tested unfairly, rarely survives unscarred. The first sign that everything was about to unravel came quietly, disguised as an ordinary evening. Jim had just returned home from work when he noticed Rosalind sitting alone in the living room. The lights dim, her phone resting face down beside her. She smiled when he walked in, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Jim had seen that look before in business negotiations, right before a deal collapsed. It unsettled him. Rosalind asked about his day, her voice unusually gentle. Jim spoke about meetings, traffic, nothing of importance. Then she asked about Zara. The name landed heavily between them. Jim paused, surprised but not defensive. He spoke carefully, explaining that Zara had started a new job opportunity, that she was trying to change her life. He framed it as something positive, something any decent person would support. Rosalind listened, nodding slowly, her nails pressing into her palm beneath the cushion. She asked if he felt responsible for Zara. Jim hesitated again, just long enough to betray honesty. "I care about her," he said, choosing the word with caution. "As a person." That was the moment Rosalind knew the test had failed. Not because Jim had cheated, but because his heart had opened somewhere she had not permitted. In Rosalind's world, love was exclusive, guarded, controlled. Jim's compassion felt like betrayal. She excused herself early that night, claiming a headache, leaving Jim confused and restless. He didn't follow her. He stayed on the couch, replaying the conversation, realizing for the first time that he was hiding something, not an affair, but a feeling. Zara sensed the shift too. Her new job was demanding, unfamiliar, and humbling. She struggled with spreadsheets, schedules, professionalism, but every small victory felt earned. For the first time, her body was not her currency. She wanted to tell Jim how much it meant to her, but she stopped herself. Gratitude, she told herself, must not grow into dependence. Rosalind called her the next day, her tone sharp, stripped of pretense. She demanded Zara end all contact with Jim immediately. Zara listened quietly, then did something she had never done before. She refused. Not rudely, not defiantly, simply honestly. "He didn't deserve this," Zara said, "and neither do I." That refusal ignited Rosalind's final move. She decided Jim needed to know part of the truth, at least. Not the whole scheme, not her role as puppeteer, but enough to poison whatever fragile bond existed between him and Zara. She arranged a meeting, pretending she wanted transparency, pretending she was finally ready to trust. When Jim arrived at the cafe, he found both women seated across from each other. The air was heavy with unspoken words. Rosalind spoke first, accusing Zara of pursuing Jim for financial gain, hinting at her past without naming it directly. Zara's face flushed with shame, then hardened with resolve. Jim listened in silence, confusion turning into shock as fragments began to align. He looked at Zara, searching her face for denial. Zara met his eyes, tears welling, and nodded. "I was paid," she said softly. "But I never touched you. I never lied about who you were." The world tilted. Jim stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He felt betrayed from all sides, used by Zara, manipulated by Rosalind, foolish for believing intentions were always pure. He left without another word, the silence louder than any argument. That night, Rosalind believed she had won, but victory tasted bitter. Jim did not come home. Zara, alone in her small apartment, finally allowed herself to cry not because she lost Jim, but because she lost the version of herself she had just begun to believe in. She deleted Rosalind's number, rejected the remaining payment, and resolved to face life without borrowed power or deception. Jim spent the night driving aimlessly through the city, confronting truths he could no longer ignore. He realized Rosalind's jealousy had never been love, it was fear disguised as possession. And Zara's honesty, even when late, had been more real than anything else he'd been offered. By morning, one thing was clear. This was no longer about a test. It was about choices. And in choosing truth, Jim was about to shatter the only relationship he had ever thought was safe. Jim woke up in a quiet hotel room, sunlight pressing through thin curtains, his head heavy with unanswered questions. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past months with painful clarity. The patterns were now impossible to ignore: the subtle isolations, the quiet replacements of staff, the constant need for reassurance disguised as concern. Rosalind hadn't trusted him long before Zara ever entered the picture. The test had only revealed a truth that already existed. He knew what he had to do. Rosalind, meanwhile, sat in their apartment, untouched breakfast growing cold on the table. She had expected anger, confrontation, even tears. What she hadn't expected was silence. Jim's absence echoed louder than any argument. For the first time, she wondered if she had miscalculated not Jim's loyalty, but her own capacity to lose him. When Jim finally returned, he didn't raise his voice. That frightened Rosalind more than rage ever could. He spoke calmly, methodically, laying out what he now understood. He asked questions she couldn't answer without exposing herself. When he asked directly if she had orchestrated the entire situation, Rosalind tried to justify it as love, as fear, as protection. But the words collapsed under their own weight. "You didn't test my loyalty," Jim said quietly. "You tested your control." That sentence ended everything. Rosalind cried, pleaded, apologized, but trust once dissected does not regenerate easily. Jim walked away not because he loved Zara more, but because he finally understood that love without trust was simply a cage with softer walls. Zara found out days later. She didn't celebrate. She didn't hope. She had already decided to rebuild her life without emotional debts. When Jim asked to see her, she almost refused. Almost. They met in a modest cafe, far from luxury and secrets. Jim apologized not just for the situation, but for the unintended emotional weight his kindness had created. Zara listened, grateful but guarded. He told her he was starting over, alone. Zara told him she was doing the same. There was no dramatic confession, no rushed romance, just honesty, just respect. They agreed to walk separate paths for now, understanding that healing demanded distance, not desire. Months passed. Zara thrived quietly. She earned promotions, enrolled in evening classes, sent money home without shame. She no longer needed stages or shadows to survive. Jim watched from afar, proud but restrained, learning what it meant to care without possession. Rosalind, too, learned, though painfully, that love cannot be secured through fear. She sought therapy, faced her insecurities, and accepted responsibility without excuses. Growth came slowly, unevenly, but it came. Fate, patient and observant, reunited Jim and Zara a year later by accident, not design. This time, there were no tests, no secrets, no power imbalance. Just two people who had learned the cost of love and were finally willing to pay it honestly. And in that quiet moment, the real lesson settled in. Love that is tested unfairly will break. Love that is chosen freely will endure.